The opulent ballroom of the Winthrop mansion glittered with chandeliers and the sparkle of diamonds adorning the necks of New York's elite. It was a gathering of the crème de la crème, a celebration of wealth and status that would be the talk of the town for weeks to come. Among the sea of designer gowns and tailored suits, one figure stood out like a dandelion in a bed of roses. Abigail Thompson, a 28-year-old waitress from a small town in Kansas, clutched her second-hand purse tightly as she tried to blend into the crowd. Her simple blue dress, purchased from a thrift store, was a stark contrast to the haute couture surrounding her. She was here on a mission, one that required all the courage she could muster. As she scanned the room, her eyes fell upon the host of the evening, the formidable Victoria Winthrop. The silver-haired matriarch of the Winthrop family exuded an aura of power and intimidation that sent shivers down Abigail's spine. Victoria's cold, steel-gray eyes seemed to cut through the crowd, judging each guest with a single glance. Abigail took a deep breath, steeling herself for what she was about to do. She had traveled across the country, spent her last penny, and snuck into this party for one reason only: to confront Victoria Winthrop about the truth that had been hidden for nearly 3 decades. As Abigail made her way through the crowd, she couldn't help but overhear snippets of conversation. "Did you see what she's wearing? How did someone like that get in here?" a woman in a red sequined gown whispered to her companion. "Probably snuck in with the help," her friend replied with a snicker. "Security is getting lax these days." Abigail felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment, but she pressed on. She had faced worse in her life, and she wasn't about to let a few snide remarks deter her from her purpose. Just as she was about to reach Victoria, a tall, handsome man stepped into her path. His piercing blue eyes and chiseled jawline marked him as Alexander Winthrop, Victoria's son and heir to the Winthrop fortune. "Excuse me, miss," he said, his voice smooth as silk. "I don't believe we've been introduced. Are you lost?" Abigail's heart raced. She hadn't planned on encountering Alexander. "And no," she stammered. "I'm here to speak with Mrs. Winthrop." Alexander's eyebrow arched elegantly. "Oh. And what business might you have with my mother?" Before Abigail could respond, Victoria's voice cut through the air like a whip. "Alexander, darling, who is this person you're speaking with?" Abigail turned to face Victoria, her resolve strengthening. "Mrs. Winthrop, my name is Abigail Thompson. I've come a long way to speak with you about something important." Victoria's eyes narrowed as she took in Abigail's appearance. "I don't recall sending an invitation to anyone named Thompson, especially not someone so quaint." The nearby guests tittered, and Abigail felt her face grow hot. But she stood her ground. "Please, Mrs. Winthrop. It's about your late husband, Edward. There's something you need to know." At the mention of Edward's name, Victoria's face hardened. "How dare you mention my husband's name? Guards! Remove this woman immediately." 2 burly security guards appeared as if from thin air, each grabbing one of Abigail's arms. As they began to drag her away, Abigail called out desperately, "He had another family. I'm his daughter." The ballroom fell silent, all eyes turning to Victoria. For a moment, the matriarch's composure slipped, revealing a flicker of shock and something else: fear. "Stop," Victoria commanded, her voice barely above a whisper. The guards froze, still holding Abigail. "Release her." As Abigail was set free, she stumbled slightly, catching herself on a nearby table. The crystal glasses clinked ominously, mirroring the tension in the air. Victoria approached Abigail, her gaze piercing. "You will come with me. Now." She turned to address the stunned crowd. "Please, continue enjoying the party. This is merely a misunderstanding that I will deal with personally." As Victoria led Abigail away from the ballroom and into a private study, whispers erupted behind them. Alexander followed close behind, his face a mask of confusion and growing anger. The study door closed with a heavy thud, shutting out the murmurs of the party. Victoria turned to face Abigail, her eyes blazing. "Now, young woman, you have exactly 1 minute to explain yourself before I have you arrested for trespassing and slander." Abigail took a deep breath, reaching into her purse to pull out a worn photograph. "This is my mother, Sarah, with your husband Edward. It was taken 29 years ago in Oakville, Kansas." Victoria snatched the photo, her hands trembling slightly as she examined it. Alexander peered over her shoulder, his eyes widening in recognition. That's impossible," Victoria whispered. "Edward never went to Kansas. He was devoted to me, to our family." Abigail's voice was soft but firm. "He had another life, Mrs. Winthrop. A life with my mother and me. He would visit us every few months, always bringing gifts and promises of a future together." Alexander's face contorted with rage. "You're lying. My father would never." "Be quiet, Alexander," Victoria snapped, her eyes never leaving the photograph. After a long moment, she looked up at Abigail, her expression unreadable. "Continue." Abigail swallowed hard. 3 years ago, when I was 25, my mother passed away from cancer. On her deathbed, she told me the truth about my father. She gave me this photo and a letter Edward had written her years ago. That's how I found out about you, about this life he had here in New York." Victoria's perfectly manicured nails dug into the photograph. "And what is it you want? Money? To destroy our family's reputation?" Abigail shook her head vehemently. "No, Mrs. Winthrop. I don't want your money. I just wanted to know the truth. To understand why he abandoned us. Why he chose this life over ours." For a moment, Victoria's icy facade cracked, revealing a glimpse of the pain and betrayal she felt. But as quickly as it appeared, it vanished, replaced by a cold, calculating look. "You foolish girl," Victoria hissed. "Do you have any idea what you've done by coming here? The scandal this could cause? You could ruin everything we've built." Alexander stepped forward, his fists clenched. "Mother, we can't let her leave. She'll go to the press. We have to." "Silence!" Victoria commanded. She turned back to Abigail, her voice low and dangerous. "Listen to me very carefully, Miss Thompson. You will leave this party immediately. You will return to wherever it is you came from, and you will never speak of this again. If you do, I will use every resource at my disposal to destroy you. Do you understand?" Abigail felt tears welling up in her eyes. This wasn't how she had imagined this confrontation going. "But don't you want to know about him? About the man he was when he was with us?" For a fleeting second, something akin to longing flashed in Victoria's eyes. But it was quickly replaced by steely resolve. "The Edward the First knew, the one who built this empire with me, is the only one that matters. Your Edward, if he even existed, is nothing but a ghost. A mistake." The words cut through Abigail like a knife. She had come seeking answers, hoping for some kind of connection or closure. Instead, she found only more pain and rejection. As Victoria moved to call the guards, a commotion erupted outside the study. The door burst open, revealing a disheveled man in his early 30s. His expensive suit was rumpled, and his eyes were wild with a mix of alcohol and desperation. "Mother! Alexander!" he shouted. I heard there was some girl claiming to be father's." He stopped short when his eyes fell on Abigail. The color drained from his face as he staggered forward, gripping the edge of a nearby desk for support. "It's you," he whispered. "Oh God, it's really you." Victoria's eyes darted between the newcomer and Abigail, confusion and fear battling for dominance on her face. "William, what are you talking about? Do you know this woman?" William, Victoria's younger son and the black sheep of the Winthrop family, nodded slowly. "I've seen her before. In a photo Father kept hidden in his desk. I found it years ago, but he made me swear never to tell anyone." Abigail's heart pounded in her chest. You knew about me?" William's eyes filled with tears. "I'm so sorry. I wanted to find you, to tell you the truth, but Father, he made me promise. He said it would destroy everything if anyone found out." Victoria stumbled backward, collapsing into a nearby armchair. Her carefully constructed world was crumbling around her. "This can't be happening," she murmured. Edward wouldn't, he couldn't. Alexander, who had been silent throughout this exchange, suddenly lunged forward, grabbing Abigail by the shoulders. "You need to leave. Now. Before you ruin everything our family has worked for." But William stepped between them, pushing his brother away. "No. We can't just send her away. She's family, Alex. Whether you like it or not." As the brothers faced off, tension crackling between them, Victoria slowly rose from her chair. Her face was a mask of icy calm, but her eyes burned with a mixture of pain, anger, and something else, determination. "Enough," she said, her voice cutting through the argument. "Miss Thompson. Abigail. It seems we have much to discuss. But not here, not now. This is neither the time nor the place for such revelations." Abigail's head spun with the rapid turn of events. What are you saying, Mrs. Winthrop?" Victoria straightened her spine, every inch the formidable matriarch she was known to be. "I'm saying that you will leave this party quietly. You will check into the Plaza Hotel, use my name, they'll give you a suite. Tomorrow morning, we will meet and discuss this situation civilly." Alexander's jaw dropped. "Mother, you can't be serious. We should call our lawyers, have her sign a non-disclosure agreement, or better yet, have her arrested for." "I said enough, Alexander," Victoria snapped. She turned back to Abigail, her gaze piercing. "Can I trust you to do as I ask? To wait until tomorrow before we address this situation?" Abigail nodded, still reeling from the encounter. "Yes, Mrs. Winthrop. I just want the truth. That's all I've ever wanted." Victoria's expression softened almost imperceptibly. "The truth, my dear, is often more complicated than we wish it to be. Go now. We'll speak in the morning." As Abigail was escorted out of the study by a surprisingly gentle William, she couldn't help but feel that her life had irrevocably changed. She had come seeking answers about her past, but instead, she found herself on the precipice of a future she could never have imagined. The glittering ballroom seemed dim and unimportant as she passed through it one last time. The whispers and stares of the elite guests washed over her, but she barely noticed them. Her mind was focused on the morning to come, on the truths that would finally be revealed. As she stepped out into the cool New York night, Abigail took a deep breath. The city lights twinkled like stars, full of promise and possibility. For the first time in her life, she felt a glimmer of hope that she might finally understand who she truly was and where she came from. Little did she know that this was just the beginning of a journey that would test her strength, challenge her beliefs, and ultimately lead her to discover the true meaning of family, love, and self-worth. The Winthrop mansion faded into the distance as her taxi pulled away, but its secrets and the lives intertwined within its walls would soon come to light, changing everything Abigail thought she knew about herself and the world around her. As the first light of dawn began to paint the New York sky, Abigail lay awake in her luxurious suite at the Plaza Hotel. Sleep had eluded her, her mind racing with the events of the previous night and the possibilities of what the morning would bring. She fingered the worn photograph of her mother and Edward Winthrop, the only tangible connection she had to her past. A soft knock at the door startled her from her reverie. Abigail's heart raced as she approached the door, wondering who could be calling at such an early hour. To her surprise, she found William Winthrop standing in the hallway, his eyes rimmed with dark circles that suggested he, too, had had a sleepless night. "I hope I didn't wake you," he said softly. I couldn't wait until the official meeting. I needed to talk to you." Abigail hesitated for a moment before stepping aside to let him in. As William entered the suite, his eyes widened at the opulence surrounding them. "I forget sometimes how the other half lives," he muttered, more to himself than to Abigail. "Why are you here, William?" Abigail asked, her voice a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. William ran a hand through his disheveled hair. "I needed you to know. I've always known about you. Well, not you specifically, but I knew Father had another family. I found out when I was a teenager, and it changed everything." Abigail sank onto the plush sofa, her legs suddenly weak. "You knew? All this time?" William nodded, his expression pained. "Father made me swear to keep it a secret. He said it would destroy our family, ruin everything he and Mother had built. But knowing, it ate away at me. It's why I started drinking, why I became the family disappointment." As William poured out his heart, sharing stories of Edward Winthrop that painted a picture of a complex, flawed man torn between two worlds, Abigail felt a strange mix of emotions. Anger at the secrets kept, sorrow for the father she never truly knew, and an unexpected kinship with this half-brother who had carried the burden of knowledge for so long. Their conversation was interrupted by another knock at the door. This time, it was Victoria Winthrop herself, impeccably dressed despite the early hour, with Alexander hovering protectively behind her. Victoria's eyes narrowed as she took in the scene before her, William and Abigail, clearly in the middle of an intense conversation. "I see you've taken it upon yourself to begin the family reunion without me, William," she said, her voice cold. As they all settled into the suite's sitting area, the tension was palpable. Victoria sat ramrod straight, her face an unreadable mask. Alexander paced near the window, shooting suspicious glances at Abigail. William slumped in his chair, looking both defiant and ashamed. Victoria broke the silence, her voice carefully controlled. "Miss Thompson. Abigail. I've had my private investigators working through the night. They've confirmed your story, at least in its broad strokes. It seems my late husband led a more complicated life than I ever imagined." Abigail's breath caught in her throat. "So you believe me?" "I believe that Edward had a relationship with your mother," Victoria conceded. "What I'm struggling to understand is why you've chosen to come forward now, years after his death. What is it you want from us?" The question hung in the air, heavy with implication. Abigail took a deep breath, gathering her courage. "I don't want your money, Mrs. Winthrop. I didn't come here to blackmail you or to ruin your family's reputation. I came because I needed to know the truth about where I came from. Who I am." Victoria's expression softened almost imperceptibly. "And now that you know the truth, or at least part of it, what do you intend to do with this information?" Abigail clasped her hands tightly in her lap, fighting to keep her voice steady. I'm not sure. I never expected to get this far. I guess I just want to understand. To know who Edward Winthrop really was, and maybe, to find a place where I belong." Alexander scoffed, breaking his silence. "You can't seriously be considering accepting her into the family, Mother. Think of the scandal, the damage to our reputation." Victoria held up a hand, silencing her eldest son. "Enough, Alexander. This situation requires delicacy and consideration." She turned back to Abigail, her steel-gray eyes assessing. "Tell me, child, what do you know of your mother's relationship with Edward?" As Abigail recounted the story her mother had shared on her deathbed, tales of a charming businessman who swept into their small Kansas town, of stolen moments and promises of a future together, she could see the pain etched on Victoria's face. Despite the matriarch's attempts to maintain her composure, the revelation of her late husband's double life was clearly taking its toll. William leaned forward, his eyes shining with unshed tears. "Father always spoke so fondly of Kansas. He'd disappear for days, sometimes weeks, claiming he was scouting new business opportunities. I never imagined." Victoria's hand trembled slightly as she reached for her purse, extracting a small, ornate key. "There's something you should see," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "In Edward's study, there's a locked drawer in his desk. I've never opened it, out of respect for his privacy. But now..." Alexander's eyes widened. "Mother, you can't be serious. Whatever's in that drawer, it's private. Father never intended." "Your father never intended for his secrets to come to light," Victoria snapped, a rare display of emotion cracking her carefully cultivated facade. "But here we are, Alexander. The time for hiding is over." As the Winthrop family and Abigail made their way back to the mansion, an uneasy silence settled over them. The opulent halls that had buzzed with life during last night's gala now seemed cold and oppressive, weighted down by unspoken truths and shattered illusions. Edward's study was a testament to old-world luxury, rich mahogany paneling, leather-bound books lining the walls, and a massive desk that dominated the room. Victoria's hands shook slightly as she approached the desk, inserting the small key into a nearly invisible lock on the bottom drawer. The drawer slid open with a soft hiss, revealing a collection of papers, photographs, and small mementos. Victoria stepped back, unable to bring herself to touch the contents. I can't," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Abigail moved forward hesitantly, aware of the weight of the moment. As she began to sift through the drawer's contents, gasps and murmurs filled the room. There were more photographs, Abigail as a baby, as a toddler, as a young girl. School reports, drawings, even a lock of hair tied with a faded ribbon. Edward Winthrop had kept a record of the daughter he had never publicly acknowledged. But it was a stack of unsent letters that truly shook the foundations of the Winthrop family. Addressed to Abigail, they chronicled Edward's thoughts, his regrets, his love for the daughter he could never claim. The final letter, dated just days before his unexpected death, revealed a man torn between two worlds, desperate to make amends but unsure how to bridge the gulf he had created. As Abigail read the letters aloud, her voice trembling with emotion, she could see the impact on those around her. Victoria had sunk into Edward's chair, her face ashen. Alexander paced furiously, his world clearly upended. And William wept openly, years of suspicion and resentment finally confirmed. When the last letter had been read, a heavy silence blanketed the room. It was Victoria who finally broke it, her voice soft but resolute. "It seems, Abigail, that you are indeed Edward's daughter. And as such, you are a Winthrop." Alexander whirled to face his mother, his face a mask of disbelief and anger. "You can't be serious, Mother. This will ruin us. The press will have a field day. Our business partners, our social standing, everything we've worked for will be destroyed." Victoria rose from the chair, drawing herself up to her full height. In that moment, it was easy to see why she was known as one of New York's most formidable women. "Our family's legacy is built on more than just social standing and business deals, Alexander. It's built on integrity, on doing what's right even when it's difficult. Your father. Her voice caught for a moment before she continued, your father lost sight of that. I won't make the same mistake. She turned to Abigail, her expression softening. I won't pretend this is easy for me. Edward's betrayal, it cuts deep. But you are innocent in all of this. You're a Winthrop, and it's time we acknowledged that. William stepped forward, placing a supportive hand on Abigail's shoulder. I've always wanted a sister, he said with a watery smile. Abigail felt overwhelmed, tears streaming down her face. I don't know what to say. I never expected. I just wanted to know where I came from. I don't want to disrupt your lives. Victoria's laugh was tinged with bitterness. My dear, our lives were disrupted the moment Edward decided to lead a double life. But perhaps this is an opportunity for healing. For all of us. As the family began to discuss the practicalities of integrating Abigail into their world, legal recognition, a press strategy, living arrangements, a commotion outside the study door caught their attention. The door burst open, revealing Penelope Winthrop Hayes, Victoria's daughter and the middle child of the Winthrop siblings. Penelope's eyes were wild, her normally perfectly coiffed hair disheveled. Is it true? She demanded, her gaze zeroing in on Abigail. The servants are whispering about a secret sister. I thought it was just ridiculous gossip, but... She trailed off, taking in the scene before her, the open drawer, the scattered photographs, the tear-stained faces of her family members. Victoria sighed heavily. Penelope, darling, come in and close the door. It seems we have much to discuss. As Victoria began to explain the situation to her daughter, Abigail felt a wave of dizziness wash over her. The events of the past 24 hours, the gala, the confrontation, the revelations, suddenly felt overwhelming. She swayed slightly, and it was William who steadied her, concern etched on his face. Perhaps we should continue this discussion later, he suggested, glancing meaningfully at his mother. It's been a long night for all of us, and I think we could all use some time to process. Victoria nodded, her fatigue finally showing through her carefully maintained exterior. Yes, I think that's wise. Abigail, you're welcome to stay here at the mansion. We have plenty of guest rooms, and I think it's best if we keep you close while we figure out our next steps. Alexander opened his mouth as if to protest, but a sharp look from his mother silenced him. Penelope, still reeling from the news, simply nodded mutely. As the family dispersed, each retreating to their own corners of the massive house to grapple with the seismic shift in their reality, Abigail found herself alone in one of the Winthrop mansion's opulent guest suites. The room was larger than her entire apartment back in Kansas, decorated in shades of cream and gold that spoke of old money and refined taste. She sank onto the edge of the plush bed, her mind whirling. Just days ago, she had been Abigail Thompson, a simple waitress from a small town, carrying the weight of her mother's final confession. Now, she was Abigail Winthrop, the secret daughter of one of New York's most prominent businessmen, thrust into a world of wealth and privilege she could scarcely comprehend. A soft knock at the door roused her from her thoughts. Come in, she called, her voice hoarse from the emotional toll of the day. To her surprise, it was Penelope who entered, looking far more composed than she had earlier. The Winthrop daughter was the picture of upper-class elegance, perfectly tailored clothes, flawless makeup, and an air of confident sophistication that made Abigail acutely aware of her own simple appearance. I thought you might like something more comfortable to wear, Penelope said, holding out a silk robe and what looked like designer pajamas. We seem to be about the same size. Abigail accepted the clothes gratefully. Thank you, that's very kind. Penelope perched on a nearby armchair, studying Abigail with an intensity that was somewhat unnerving. So, she said after a moment, you're my sister. The bluntness of the statement caught Abigail off guard. Yes, I suppose I am. A wry smile tugged at Penelope's lips. You know, I always wanted a sister. Growing up with Alexander and William, well, let's just say it wasn't always easy being the only girl. But I never imagined it would happen like this. Abigail fidgeted with the silk of the robe, unsure how to respond. I'm sorry, she finally said. I never meant to cause any trouble for your family. If you want me to leave. Don't be ridiculous, Penelope cut her off. You're here now, and from what Mother says, you're here to stay. Besides, she added, her tone softening slightly, it's not your fault our father couldn't keep his pants on. The crude honesty of the statement startled a laugh out of Abigail. Penelope grinned in response, and for a moment, the tension between them eased. Listen, Penelope said, leaning forward, I know this is all overwhelming. God knows I'm still trying to wrap my head around it. But if you're going to be a part of this family, and it seems you are, then you're going to need help navigating this world. It's not as simple as it looks from the outside. Abigail nodded, feeling a surge of gratitude for this unexpected olive branch. I'd appreciate any help you can give. This is all so foreign to me. Penelope's eyes gleamed with a mixture of mischief and determination. Oh, honey, you have no idea. But don't worry, by the time I'm done with you, you'll be every inch a Winthrop. Starting with your wardrobe. No sister of mine is going to be seen in off-the-rack clothing. As Penelope launched into a detailed explanation of the do's and don'ts of high society fashion, Abigail felt a glimmer of hope. Perhaps, just perhaps, she might find a place in this new world after all. The next few weeks passed in a whirlwind of activity. Victoria, ever the master strategist, had engaged a team of lawyers and PR specialists to manage the public revelation of Abigail's existence. The story broke in the society pages. Winthrop heir discovered, late tycoon's secret daughter comes to light, sending shockwaves through New York's elite circles. Abigail found herself thrust into a crash course on how to be a Winthrop. Penelope took charge of her physical transformation, whisking her off to exclusive boutiques and high-end salons. William, eager to bond with his newfound sister, took on the role of cultural educator, introducing her to the art galleries, theaters, and museums that were staples of their social circle. Alexander remained cold and distant, clearly unhappy with the situation but unwilling to openly defy his mother's decision. His resentment simmered just below the surface, creating an undercurrent of tension whenever he and Abigail were in the same room. Victoria, for her part, seemed determined to make up for lost time. She took Abigail under her wing, sharing stories of the Winthrop family history and guiding her through the intricacies of their business empire. It was during one of these lessons, as they pored over financial reports in Edward's old study, that Victoria broached a subject that had been weighing on her mind. Abigail, dear, she began, setting aside the papers she'd been reviewing, I've been thinking about your future. About your place in this family and in the company. Abigail looked up, a flicker of apprehension crossing her face. Despite the warm welcome she'd received from most of the family, she still felt like an outsider at times, waiting for the other shoe to drop. Victoria continued, her tone gentle but firm. You're Edward's daughter, and as such, you have a rightful claim to a portion of his estate. The lawyers have been working on amending his will to reflect this. Abigail's eyes widened. Mrs. Winthrop, Victoria, I never came here for money. I don't need. Victoria held up a hand, silencing her. I know that's not why you came, my dear. But it's what's right. Edward may have failed in his responsibilities to you in life, but I intend to see them fulfilled in death. She paused, a shadow passing over her face. It's the least I can do to make amends for the years you lost. Tears pricked at Abigail's eyes. Thank you, she whispered, overwhelmed by the gesture. Victoria nodded, then straightened, her businesslike demeanor returning. "There's more. I want you to take an active role in the company. You're smart, Abigail, and you have a fresh perspective that could be valuable. I'm proposing that you join our charitable foundation as a director. It would give you a chance to learn the business while also making a real difference in the world." Abigail sat back, stunned. "Are you sure? I don't have any experience in—" "You have life experience," Victoria interrupted. "You know what it's like to struggle, to work hard for everything you have. That's something the rest of us," she gestured around the opulent study, "can sometimes forget. Your insight could be invaluable in directing our philanthropic efforts." As Abigail absorbed the magnitude of what Victoria was offering, a commotion in the hallway caught their attention. Raised voices approached the study, and suddenly the door burst open, revealing a furious Alexander. "Mother, you can't be serious," he shouted, waving a document in his hand. "Giving her a seat on the board? A directorship? She's been here for 5 minutes, and you're handing her the keys to the kingdom." Victoria rose, her eyes flashing dangerously. "Alexander, that's quite enough. My decisions regarding the company and this family are not up for debate." But Alexander was beyond reason, years of resentment and insecurity boiling over. "She's going to ruin everything. Can't you see she's just here for the money, for the Winthrop name? She's nothing but a gold digger, just like her mother." The words hung in the air, sharp and venomous. Abigail felt as if she'd been slapped, tears springing to her eyes unbidden. Before Victoria could respond, another voice cut through the tension. "That's enough, Alex." William stood in the doorway, his normally easygoing expression replaced by one of cold anger. "You're out of line." Alexander whirled to face his brother. "Oh, of course you're defending her. Always the rebel, aren't you, Will? Happy to see the family legacy torn apart as long as it pisses off the old man, even from beyond the grave." William stepped into the room, placing himself between Alexander and Abigail. "You're drunk, Alex. Go sleep it off before you say something you can't take back." For a moment, it seemed Alexander might lash out physically. His fists clenched at his sides, his face flushed with anger and alcohol. But then, as quickly as the storm had risen, it passed. His shoulders slumped, and without another word, he turned and stalked out of the room. An uncomfortable silence settled over the study. Abigail wiped at her eyes, trying to regain her composure. "I'm so sorry," she began, but Victoria cut her off. "You have nothing to apologize for, my dear. Alexander's behavior is inexcusable." Victoria sighed heavily, suddenly looking every one of her years. "I had hoped, well, it doesn't matter what I hoped. We'll deal with Alexander later. For now, let's focus on your future with the company." William placed a comforting hand on Abigail's shoulder. "Don't let Alex get to you. He's always been threatened by change. Give him time, he'll come around." Abigail nodded, but the sting of Alexander's words lingered. Despite the weeks she'd spent integrating into the Winthrop family, moments like these served as stark reminders of how precarious her position was. She was a Winthrop by blood, but would she ever truly belong? As the days passed, Abigail threw herself into her new role at the Winthrop Charitable Foundation. She spent hours poring over reports, meeting with community leaders, and developing new initiatives to address the needs of underprivileged communities. Her background gave her unique insights, and soon she was making waves in the philanthropic world. One evening, as Abigail was working late in her office at the foundation, a soft knock on the door interrupted her concentration. She looked up to see Penelope leaning against the doorframe, an amused smile playing on her lips. You know, when I said I'd help you become a Winthrop, I didn't mean for you to adopt our workaholic tendencies quite so thoroughly, Penelope teased, sauntering into the office. Abigail laughed, pushing her reading glasses up onto her head. Sorry, I just lost track of time. There's so much to do, so many people we could be helping. Penelope perched on the edge of the desk, her expression softening. You're doing amazing work, Abby. The foundation hasn't been this energized in years. But you need to remember to take care of yourself too. All work and no play makes for a very dull socialite. Socialite? Abigail repeated, raising an eyebrow. Is that what I am now? Like it or not, darling, you're a Winthrop. And Winthrops have certain obligations to society. Penelope's eyes sparkled with mischief. Which is why I'm here. There's a charity gala next week, the biggest event of the season. And you, my dear sister, are going to be the belle of the ball. Abigail felt a flutter of anxiety in her stomach. She'd attended a few smaller events since her introduction to society, but nothing on the scale Penelope was suggesting. I don't know, Pen. I'm not sure I'm ready for something that big. Penelope waved away her concerns. Nonsense. You're more than ready. Besides, it's for a good cause, raising funds for children's education. Right up your alley. As Penelope launched into a detailed description of the gown she'd already picked out for Abigail and the eligible bachelors who would be in attendance, Abigail found herself swept up in her sister's enthusiasm. Maybe this was what she needed, a chance to truly step into her role as a Winthrop, to show the world that she belonged. The night of the gala arrived, and Abigail barely recognized herself in the mirror. The woman staring back at her was a far cry from the simple waitress who had arrived in New York just months ago. Her gown, a stunning creation of midnight blue silk that shimmered with every movement, hugged her curves before flowing elegantly to the floor. Her hair, usually pulled back in a practical ponytail, was now styled in soft waves that framed her face. Penelope's team of stylists had worked their magic, enhancing Abigail's natural beauty with subtle makeup that made her eyes sparkle and her skin glow. Well? Penelope asked, appearing behind Abigail in the mirror. What do you think? Abigail turned, a mix of excitement and nervousness bubbling in her chest. I feel like Cinderella, she admitted with a small laugh. Penelope grinned, adjusting her own emerald green gown. Well, Cinderella, your carriage awaits. Or in this case, a very expensive limousine. Shall we? As they descended the grand staircase of the Winthrop mansion, Abigail saw Victoria waiting in the foyer. The family matriarch's eyes widened as she took in her youngest daughter's transformation. Oh, Abigail, Victoria breathed, a rare display of emotion crossing her face. You look absolutely stunning. Edward would have been so proud. The mention of her father sent a pang through Abigail's heart. Despite the months that had passed, the complexity of her feelings towards Edward Winthrop, the father she'd never truly known, still caught her off guard at times. Victoria seemed to sense Abigail's inner turmoil. She reached out, clasping Abigail's hand in her own. You carry his legacy now, my dear. Not just his name or his wealth, but his spirit. The best parts of him live on in you. Touched by Victoria's words, Abigail impulsively leaned in to hug her stepmother. For a moment, Victoria stiffened and used to such displays of affection. But then she relaxed, returning the embrace. The tender moment was interrupted by the arrival of William, dashing in his tuxedo. Ladies, your chariot awaits, he announced with a playful bow. And may I say, you all look absolutely ravishing this evening. As they made their way to the limousine, Abigail noticed Alexander's conspicuous absence. Is Alex not coming? She asked hesitantly. A shadow crossed Victoria's face. Alexander sends his regrets. He had a prior engagement. The strain in Victoria's voice made it clear that Alexander's absence was less about a scheduling conflict and more about his ongoing resentment towards Abigail. Determined not to let it dampen her spirits, Abigail pushed the thought aside as they settled into the car. The gala was being held at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, its grand halls transformed into a glittering wonderland for the evening. As the Winthrop family made their entrance, a hush fell over the crowd. All eyes turned to Abigail, whispers rippling through the assembled guests. "Is that her? The secret Winthrop daughter? My God, she's stunning. Look at that gown. I heard she was just a small-town waitress before. Hard to believe, isn't it?" Abigail felt her cheeks flush under the scrutiny, but Penelope's steadying hand on her arm gave her courage. She lifted her chin, meeting the curious gazes with a serene smile. She was a Winthrop now, and it was time to act like one. As the evening progressed, Abigail found herself swept up in a whirlwind of introductions, small talk, and dance invitations. She was surprised to discover that she actually enjoyed the socializing, especially when she could steer conversations towards the charitable causes she was passionate about. It was during one such conversation, as she passionately explained the Foundation's new initiative to provide STEM education to underprivileged girls, that she caught the eye of a handsome young man across the room. He seemed to be listening intently, a look of genuine interest on his face. As the group around Abigail dispersed, the mystery man approached. Up close, she could see that he was even more attractive, piercing green eyes, chiseled features, and an air of quiet confidence that was immediately appealing. "I couldn't help but overhear your discussion," he said, his voice a rich baritone. "Your passion for education is inspiring. I'm Jack, by the way. Jack Hawthorne." Abigail felt a flutter in her stomach as she shook his offered hand. "Abigail Winthrop. It's nice to meet you, Jack." Recognition flickered in Jack's eyes at her last name, but to Abigail's relief, he didn't comment on it. Instead, he launched into a series of insightful questions about the Foundation's work, revealing a deep knowledge of educational policy and philanthropic best practices. As they talked, Abigail found herself increasingly drawn to Jack. He was intelligent, funny, and seemed genuinely interested in making a difference in the world. When he asked her to dance, she accepted without hesitation. As they swayed to the music, Abigail caught sight of Penelope watching them from across the room, a knowing smirk on her face. Abigail rolled her eyes good-naturedly at her sister's obvious matchmaking, but she couldn't deny the spark she felt with Jack. The evening was going better than Abigail could have ever imagined. She felt confident, beautiful, and for the first time since discovering her true identity, like she truly belonged in this world. But as the old saying goes, pride comes before a fall, and Abigail's fall was about to come in spectacular fashion. As she and Jack made their way off the dance floor, a commotion near the entrance caught everyone's attention. To Abigail's horror, she saw Alexander stumbling into the gala, clearly intoxicated and disheveled. "Where is she?" Alexander slurred, his voice carrying across the now silent ballroom. "Where's our little Cinderella? Come on out, Abby. Time to show everyone what you really are." Abigail froze, her heart pounding in her chest. Jack placed a protective hand on her arm, but she gently shook it off. This was a family matter, and she needed to handle it herself. Taking a deep breath, Abigail stepped forward. "Alexander," she said, her voice calm but firm. "I think you should leave. You're not yourself right now." Alexander's bitter laugh cut through the tense silence. "Oh, that's rich coming from you. Tell me, Abby, do these people know who you really are? Do they know about the trailer park you grew up in? About how you used to serve drinks to truckers at that dive bar in Kansas?" Gasps and murmurs rippled through the crowd. Abigail felt her cheeks burn with humiliation, but she stood her ground. "Yes, Alexander, I did grow up in a trailer park. And yes, I worked as a waitress. I'm not ashamed of where I came from or the work I've done. You should be. Alexander spat. You're nothing but a gold digger, just like your mother. Worming your way into our family, taking what doesn't belong to you. Before Abigail could respond, Victoria appeared at her side, her face a mask of cold fury. That is quite enough, Alexander, she said, her voice like ice. You will leave this event immediately, or I will have security remove you. For a moment, it seemed Alexander might argue further. But then, as if all the fight had suddenly drained out of him, his shoulders slumped. He turned and stumbled towards the exit, leaving a wake of shocked whispers behind him. Abigail stood rooted to the spot, feeling the weight of hundreds of eyes upon her. The beautiful evening she had been enjoying just moments ago now felt like a distant dream. She was acutely aware of her outsider status, of the gulf between her humble beginnings and the glittering world she now inhabited. To her surprise, it was Jack who broke the uncomfortable silence. He stepped forward, taking her hand in his. I don't know about anyone else, he said, his voice carrying clearly across the room, but I think a woman who has worked hard and overcome adversity to make something of herself is someone to be admired, not scorned. His words seemed to break the spell. Slowly, tentatively, applause began to ripple through the crowd. Abigail felt tears pricking at her eyes as she saw nods of approval and encouraging smiles directed her way. Victoria squeezed her arm gently. Are you all right, my dear? She asked softly. Abigail took a deep breath, squaring her shoulders. Yes, she said, surprised to find that she meant it. Yes, I am. As the gala slowly returned to its previous festive atmosphere, Abigail found herself surrounded by well-wishers. Many shared their own stories of humble beginnings or praised her work with the foundation. What Alexander had intended as a humiliation had instead become a moment of triumph. Later that night, as Abigail prepared for bed in her room at the Winthrop mansion, a soft knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. She opened it to find Penelope, still in her evening gown but with her hair let down and her feet bare. Hey, sis, Penelope said softly. I thought you might want to talk. Abigail nodded gratefully, stepping aside to let her sister in. They settled on the plush window seat, looking out over the twinkling lights of the city. You handled yourself beautifully tonight, Penelope said after a moment. I'm proud of you. Abigail smiled weakly. Thanks. I don't understand why Alexander hates me so much. What have I done to make him resent me like this? Penelope sighed, running a hand through her hair. It's not you, Abby. Not really. Alex has always been, well, let's just say he's always felt the weight of being the Winthrop heir more heavily than the rest of us. Finding out about you, it's like it shattered his image of our family, of our father. But that's not my fault, Abigail protested. Of course it's not, Penelope agreed. But Alex, he's never been great at dealing with his emotions. It's easier for him to lash out at you than to face the complicated truth about Dad. They sat in companionable silence for a while, each lost in their own thoughts. Finally, Abigail spoke. Do you think I'll ever really fit in here, Pen? Or will I always be the outsider, the scandal waiting to happen? Penelope turned to face her, taking Abigail's hands in her own. Listen to me, Abigail Winthrop. You are one of us. Not because of your last name or because of the money in your bank account, but because of who you are. Your kindness, your passion, your determination, those are the qualities that make you a true Winthrop. Tears welled up in Abigail's eyes at her sister's heartfelt words. Thank you, she whispered. I don't know what I'd do without you, Pen. Penelope grinned, lightening the mood. Probably still be wearing off-the-rack clothing and not knowing a Monet from a Manet. Now, she continued, her eyes twinkling mischievously, let's talk about something more interesting. Like, say, a certain Jack Hawthorne? Abigail groaned, but she couldn't hide the smile tugging at her lips. As the sisters fell into easy conversation, dissecting every moment of Abigail's interaction with Jack, she felt a warmth spreading through her chest. This, she realized, was what family was supposed to feel like. The next morning, Abigail woke to find the events of the previous night splashed across the society pages. To her relief, most of the coverage was surprisingly positive. Her graceful handling of Alexander's outburst had won her many admirers, and there was considerable praise for her work with the Winthrop Foundation. As she made her way down to breakfast, Abigail steeled herself for the family's reaction. To her surprise, she found Victoria alone in the dining room, sipping coffee and perusing the morning papers. "Good morning, Abigail," Victoria said, looking up as she entered. "I trust you slept well?" Abigail nodded, taking a seat across from her stepmother. "As well as could be expected, I suppose." "Victoria, about last night." Victoria held up a hand, cutting her off. "You have nothing to apologize for, my dear. If anyone should be apologizing, it's Alexander. And believe me, he will be." There was a steely glint in Victoria's eye that made Abigail almost feel sorry for her half-brother. "Almost. I've been thinking," Victoria continued, setting aside her coffee cup. "Perhaps it's time we made your position in this family more official." Abigail's brow furrowed in confusion. "What do you mean?" "I thought the legal adoption was already in process." "It is," Victoria confirmed. "But I'm talking about something more. I want to name you as my successor." Abigail's jaw dropped. Your successor? But what about Alexander? Or William?" Victoria's lips curved in a wry smile. "Alexander has proven time and again that he's not ready for the responsibility. And William, bless his heart, has never shown any interest in running the family business. But you, Abigail, you've shown a remarkable aptitude for both business and philanthropy. You have the vision and the heart to lead the Winthrop empire into the future." Abigail sat back, stunned by Victoria's words. I don't know what to say. This is all so sudden." "Are you sure?" Victoria reached across the table, taking Abigail's hand in her own. "My dear, I've never been more certain of anything in my life. You may not have grown up as a Winthrop, but you embody the best of what this family should be. Your father would be proud." Tears pricked at Abigail's eyes at the mention of Edward. Despite never having known him, his presence, or rather, his absence, had shaped so much of her life. And now, here she was, being offered the chance to carry on his legacy in a way she never could have imagined. I need some time to think about this," Abigail said softly. "It's a huge responsibility." Victoria nodded, understanding in her eyes. "Of course. Take all the time you need. But know that I have faith in you, Abigail. More faith than I've had in anyone in a very long time." As Victoria excused herself to attend to some business matters, Abigail remained at the table, her mind whirling with the implications of what she'd just been offered. She was so lost in thought that she didn't notice William enter the room until he spoke. "You look like you've seen a ghost," he said, concern evident in his voice as he took a seat beside her. "Everything okay, Abby?" Abigail turned to her half-brother, still dazed. "William, Mother just offered to name me as her successor. To run the entire Winthrop empire." William's eyebrows shot up in surprise, but to Abigail's relief, there was no hint of resentment in his expression. Instead, a slow grin spread across his face. Well, he chuckled. "Looks like the prodigal daughter has become the golden child." can't say I'm entirely surprised, though. You're not upset? Abigail asked hesitantly. William shook his head, his expression turning serious. Abby, if there's one thing I've learned in my years of rebellious disappointment, it's that the Winthrop legacy is a heavy burden. I've never wanted it. Alex, well, he wants it for all the wrong reasons. But you? You could actually do some good with it. Abigail felt a rush of affection for her brother. Despite their short time knowing each other, William had become one of her staunchest allies in the family. I'm not sure I'm ready for this, she admitted. William squeezed her shoulder reassuringly. Nobody ever is. But if anyone can handle it, it's you. Just, don't let it change you, okay? I kind of like having a sister who remembers what the real world is like. As William left to start his day, Abigail found herself alone once again with her thoughts. The weight of Victoria's offer pressed down on her, a mix of excitement and trepidation swirling in her chest. Could she really do this? Led one of the most powerful families in New York? Her reverie was interrupted by the chime of her phone. A text message from an unknown number lit up the screen. Last night was unexpected. But I meant what I said. Dinner tonight? Jack. Despite everything else on her mind, Abigail couldn't help the smile that spread across her face. She quickly typed out a response, accepting Jack's invitation. Perhaps a night away from the Winthrop drama was exactly what she needed to clear her head. That evening, as Abigail prepared for her date with Jack, she found herself facing an unexpected dilemma. For the first time since her makeover, she hesitated over what to wear. Part of her wanted to dress up, to be the polished Winthrop heiress she was becoming. But another part, the part that still remembered the feel of a waitress's apron and the scent of diner coffee, longed for something simpler. In the end, she compromised. She chose an elegant but understated dress, pairing it with the simple silver locket her mother had given her years ago. As she fastened the necklace, Abigail caught sight of herself in the mirror. The woman staring back at her was neither the small-town girl from Kansas nor the glittering socialite from last night's gala. She was something in between, something new. Jack picked her up in a modest but well-maintained car, a refreshing change from the opulent limousines Abigail had grown accustomed to. As they drove through the city, Abigail found herself relaxing in Jack's presence. He was easy to talk to, genuinely interested in her thoughts and experiences. To her surprise, Jack didn't take her to one of the city's high-end restaurants. Instead, they ended up at a small, cozy Italian place tucked away in a quiet neighborhood. I hope this is okay, Jack said as they were seated. I thought you might appreciate something a little less, spotlight-wise after last night. Abigail felt a rush of warmth at his thoughtfulness. It's perfect, she assured him. To be honest, I'm a little tired of caviar and champagne. As they shared a delicious meal of pasta and wine, Abigail found herself opening up to Jack in a way she hadn't with anyone since arriving in New York. She told him about her childhood in Kansas, about her mother's passing, and about the whirlwind her life had become since discovering her true parentage. It must be overwhelming, Jack said sympathetically. Going from a normal life to all of this. Abigail nodded, twirling pasta around her fork. It is. Don't get me wrong, I'm grateful for the opportunities one have now. The work I'm doing with the foundation, it means everything to me. But sometimes I feel like I'm losing myself in all of this. Jack reached across the table, gently taking her hand. For what it's worth, I don't think you've lost anything. The woman I see in front of me is compassionate, driven, and genuinely wants to make a difference. Those qualities don't come from a last name or a bank account. Abigail felt a flutter in her chest at Jack's words and the warmth of his hand on hers. For the first time in months, she felt truly seen for who she was, not for her newfound status or her family drama. As the evening wore on, Abigail found herself reluctant for it to end. Jack seemed to feel the same way, suggesting a walk through a nearby park after dinner. As they strolled under the starlit sky, their hands intertwined, Abigail felt a sense of peace settle over her. "Jack," she said softly, coming to a stop on a small footbridge. "Can I ask you something?" He turned to face her, his green eyes reflecting the moonlight. "Of course. Anything." Abigail took a deep breath. "Victoria, my stepmother, she's offered to name me as her successor. To eventually take over the entire Winthrop empire. I'm not sure what to do." Jack was quiet for a moment, considering her words. "That's a huge responsibility," he said finally. "What does your heart tell you?" "That's just it," Abigail sighed. "Part of me is excited by the challenge, by the chance to really make a difference on a large scale. But another part is terrified. What if I'm not cut out for this world? What if I lose myself in it?" Jack squeezed her hand gently. "Abigail, in the short time I've known you, one thing has become very clear to me. You have a strength in you that's rare. It's not just about intelligence or business acumen, though you clearly have both. It's about knowing who you are and staying true to that, no matter what life throws at you." He paused, tucking a stray lock of hair behind her ear. "I can't tell you what to do. But I can tell you this, whatever you decide, don't do it because you think it's what you're supposed to do. Do it because it's what you want, because it aligns with who you are and who you want to be." Abigail felt tears prick at her eyes, moved by Jack's words and the understanding in his gaze. Without thinking, she leaned in, pressing her lips to his in a soft, sweet kiss. When they parted, both slightly breathless, Jack smiled. "I've been wanting to do that all night," he admitted. Abigail laughed, feeling lighter than she had in weeks. "Me too," she confessed. As Jack drove her back to the Winthrop mansion, Abigail felt a sense of clarity settling over her. She knew what she had to do. The next morning, Abigail requested a family meeting. As she stood before Victoria, Penelope, William, and a sullen Alexander in Edward's old study, she took a deep breath, steeling herself for what she was about to say. "First of all, I want to thank you all for welcoming me into this family," she began. "These past few months have been, well, they've been a whirlwind. I've learned so much about this world, about all of you, and about myself." She turned to Victoria. "Mother, I'm deeply honored by your offer to name me as your successor. The faith you've shown in me, it means more than I can express." Victoria nodded, a hint of a smile on her face. Alexander shifted uncomfortably in his seat, while Penelope and William watched Abigail with curious expressions. "But," Abigail continued, "I've done a lot of thinking, and I've come to a decision. I can't accept the position as your heir." A collective gasp went through the room. Alexander sat up straighter, a mix of surprise and hope crossing his face. "Abigail," Victoria began, but Abigail held up a hand, asking for a chance to finish. "Please, let me explain," she said. "I'm not rejecting my place in this family. Far from it. But I believe I can do the most good, can best honor Edward's legacy, by focusing on the foundation. I want to expand our charitable work, to use the Winthrop resources and influence to make real, tangible changes in people's lives." She paused, looking each family member in the eye. "I'm not interested in running the business empire. That's not where my passion lies. But the foundation? That's where I know I can make a difference." Victoria was quiet for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Finally, she spoke. "You continue to surprise me, Abigail. Your father would be proud of the woman you've become." She stood, crossing the room to take Abigail's hands in her own. "If this is truly what you want, then you have my full support. The Winthrop Foundation will be yours to lead and shape as you see fit." Abigail felt tears of relief and gratitude well up in her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered. Penelope was the first to break the emotional silence that followed. "Well," she said, a grin spreading across her face, "I guess this means I need to start brushing up on my business skills. Someone's got to keep an eye on this empire, after all." William chuckled, slinging an arm around his sister's shoulders. "God help us all if you're in charge, Pen." As the family fell into discussion about what this new arrangement would mean, Abigail noticed Alexander slip quietly from the room. After a moment's hesitation, she followed him. She found him on the terrace, staring out over the manicured gardens. "Alex," she said softly, approaching him cautiously. He turned, and Abigail was surprised to see not anger in his eyes, but a mix of confusion and something that looked almost like respect. "Why did you do that?" he asked. "You could have had it all. The power, the prestige, everything I've worked for my entire life. Why give it up?" Abigail moved to stand beside him, looking out at the view. "Because it's not what I want," she said simply. "Alex, I grew up with nothing. I know what it's like to struggle, to wonder where your next meal is coming from. Now that I have the means to help others in that situation, that's what matters to me. Not board meetings or profit margins." She turned to face him fully. "I meant what I said in there. I'm not rejecting this family. I'm just trying to find my place in it. A place where I can do the most good." Alexander was quiet for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, almost vulnerable. "I've been awful to you. The things I said at the gala. I was drunk, but that's no excuse. I'm sorry, Abigail." Abigail felt a weight lift from her shoulders at his words. "Thank you, Alex. That means a lot to me." He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture that reminded Abigail so much of their father in the photos she'd seen. "I've been so focused on living up to Father's legacy, on being the perfect Winthrop heir, that I lost sight of what really matters. Watching you these past few months, seeing how you've approached everything, it's made me realize how much I've lost myself in all of this." Abigail reached out, hesitantly placing a hand on her brother's arm. "It's not too late to change that, you know. To figure out who you really are and what you really want." Alexander nodded slowly. "Maybe you're right." He turned to her, a small smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "You know, for a small-town girl, you're pretty wise." Abigail laughed, feeling the last of the tension between them dissipate. Must be all that fresh Kansas air. As they made their way back inside to rejoin the family, Abigail felt a sense of peace settle over her. For the first time since discovering her true identity, she felt like she truly knew who she was and where she belonged. In the months that followed, Abigail threw herself into her work with the Winthrop Foundation. Under her leadership, the organization expanded its reach, launching new initiatives in education, healthcare, and community development. Her unique perspective and genuine passion for helping others brought new energy and purpose to the foundation's work. Her personal life flourished as well. Her relationship with Jack deepened, built on a foundation of mutual respect and understanding. He became her rock, supporting her through the challenges of her new role while never letting her lose sight of who she truly was. The Winthrop family dynamics shifted too. Alexander, inspired by Abigail's example, began to explore his own passions beyond the family business. He discovered a talent for sustainable architecture and started a new division within the Winthrop Corporation focused on eco-friendly development. Penelope, to everyone's surprise, took to the business world like a fish to water. Her sharp wit and social savvy proved invaluable in navigating the complex world of corporate politics. William continued to march to the beat of his own drum, but he found new purpose in using his connections and resources to support various artistic and cultural initiatives through the foundation. And Victoria. Victoria watched it all with a sense of pride and contentment she hadn't felt in years. The family she had fought so hard to hold together was flourishing in ways she could never have imagined. 1 year to the day after Abigail had first walked into the Winthrop Gala, another celebration was held at the mansion. But this time, it wasn't a society event filled with New York's elite. Instead, it was a more intimate gathering, bringing together the people whose lives had been touched by the Winthrop Foundation's work. As Abigail stood at the podium, preparing to address the crowd, she caught sight of her family in the front row. Victoria, regal as ever but with a newfound warmth in her eyes. Penelope, stylish and confident, already networking with potential donors. William, casual but engaged, his artistic sensibilities having added a unique flair to the foundation's public image. And Alexander, looking more relaxed and genuine than Abigail had ever seen him. Jack stood off to the side, giving her an encouraging thumbs up. His support had been unwavering throughout the year, his belief in her a constant source of strength. Taking a deep breath, Abigail began to speak. She talked about the foundation's accomplishments over the past year, about the lives that had been changed and the communities that had been uplifted. But more than that, she spoke about the power of second chances, of finding one's true purpose, and of the strength that comes from embracing who you are. "A year ago, I stood in this very house, feeling like an outsider," Abigail said, her voice strong and clear. "I was a girl from a small town in Kansas, suddenly thrust into a world I barely understood. But what I've learned since then is that it's not where you come from that defines you, but what you do with the opportunities you're given." She paused, her eyes scanning the room, taking in the faces of those whose lives had been touched by the foundation's work. Each one of us has the power to make a difference. Whether we're born into privilege or have to fight for every opportunity, what matters is how we choose to use our resources, our talents, and our voices. As Abigail concluded her speech, the room erupted in applause. She stepped away from the podium, feeling a sense of accomplishment and purpose that she had never experienced before. Later that evening, as the party wound down, Abigail found herself on the terrace, looking out over the city lights. Jack joined her, wrapping an arm around her waist. "Penny for your thoughts?" he asked softly. Abigail leaned into him, a smile playing on her lips. "I was just thinking about how much has changed in a year. How much I've changed." Jack pressed a kiss to her temple. "You haven't changed, Abby. You've just become more of who you always were." She turned to face him, touched by his words. "You know, when I first came to New York, I thought I was looking for my father, for my place in the Winthrop family. But what I really found was myself. And what a wonderful self it is," Jack murmured, pulling her closer. As they stood there, wrapped in each other's arms with the New York skyline as their backdrop, Abigail felt a sense of peace wash over her. She had faced humiliation, confronted painful truths, and emerged stronger for it. She had found a family, not just in the Winthrops, but in the community she was helping to build through the foundation. The girl from Kansas who had once felt so out of place in the glittering world of New York's elite had found her voice, her purpose, and her home. And as she looked towards the future, Abigail Winthrop knew that this was just the beginning of her journey. From the doorway, Victoria watched the young couple on the terrace. A small smile played on her lips as she thought about how far they had all come. Abigail had not only found her place in the family but had helped each of them rediscover their own purpose and passion. As Victoria turned to rejoin the party, she caught sight of a photograph on the wall, Edward Winthrop, smiling broadly at some long-ago event. "You would be proud of her, Edward," she whispered. "She truly is the best of both worlds." And so, As the stars twinkled over the New York skyline, the Winthrop saga continued. It was a tale of secrets revealed, of bridges built, of wounds healed, and of a family redefined. But most of all, it was the story of a simple girl from Kansas who dared to step into a new world and, in doing so, changed it for the better. In the end, Abigail's journey from a humiliated outsider to a respected and beloved member of both the Winthrop family and New York society proved that true class, compassion, and character could overcome any obstacle. Her story would be told for generations to come, inspiring others to embrace their true selves and use their voice to make a difference in the world.